There has long prevailed in popular imagination a historical myth of epic proportions: the lost colony of Roanoke. It has all the makings of a great story. A group of 117 civilized English men, women, and children journey to an unknown land across the ocean, a land inhabited by, quote, savages so unlike themselves. When times grow tough, their fearless leader returns to England, leaving them behind, stranded on the island. It carries undertones of classic literary adventure fiction: Lord of the Flies, Robinson Crusoe, Swiss Family Robinson. The birth of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, harkens back to the very birth of Christ in the Bible, a promise of a new beginning, the light of England, vanquishing the darkness of this untamed land. And the disappearance of the colony upon Governor John White's return, vanished, gone, with a single clue left behind, carved into a post: the mysterious word Croatoan. Here we have the makings of the quintessential unsolved mystery, a genre perfected by great novelists like Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, the lost colony of Roanoke has captured our imaginations for 438 years because it really is the perfect story. But unlike some of the works of fiction I mentioned, this story really happened. These were real people. Real fates that we've romanticized and mythologized in the centuries since. And as fun as mysteries are to think about, as good of stories as they make, the lost colony of Roanoke was never a mystery at all. In fact, they told us exactly where they went. Why was it so hard for us to listen? And what recent archaeological evidence is finally forcing us to accept the obvious? Let's fix that. Hello, my name is Shay LaFountaine, and you're listening to History Fix, where I discuss lesser-known true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. And I could barely get through that line because, you guys, I am so excited. I have breaking news for you. A major update today. A break in an over 400-year-old cold case. A few days ago, I stumbled upon a news article called something like "Lost Colony Mystery Solved After 400 Years." And naturally, I was like, what? Because if you guys know me, you know the Roanoke colonies, the so-called lost colony, are of particular historical interest to me. And I've done a lot of research and even covered them way back in September of 2023 in a 2-part episode with distinguished Professor Michael Oberg, who's like an expert on the topic. If you missed those episodes, you should definitely go back and listen. It was episodes 27 and 28. I've actually linked them in the description. That's how badly I want you to go back and listen. But I'm also going to try to make this update episode stand alone, too. So even if you haven't listened to them yet, welcome. In the breaking news article I stumbled upon, it talked about how a couple of guys found some new evidence at a site on Hatteras Island, which is part of the Outer Banks of North Carolina, a little farther south than where I live. One of those guys is a Hatteras native named Scott Dawson. So I immediately reached out to Scott. This was just a couple days ago. This is like the fastest I've ever gotten an episode out. I had to rearrange the whole schedule for this. But I reached out to Scott for an interview. And here he is.
My name is Scott Dawson, and I run a museum down in Buxton that is preserving all of the Native American artifacts from the Croatoan tribe, which includes an English colony they adopted in the 1500s.
So before we get into what Scott and British archaeologist Dr. Mark Horton found on Hatteras Island and what it seems to prove, I need to quickly recap the story of the Roanoke colonies. So bear with me if you're already an expert, but none of this will make sense without the backstory. I'll make it fun, I promise. And if you truly don't have time for a recap and just want the update, skip ahead to around the 16, 17-minute mark. The story begins back in the 1580s. Queen Elizabeth I is Queen of England, and she has her eyes set on the, quote, New World, the Americas, right? Spain, her biggest rival, has already been all over the Americas, and they've been bringing back all kinds of gold and riches, right? Aztec gold that they stole and whatnot. And Elizabeth wants in. She wants to establish a colony in North America. Maybe they'll find some gold and riches in the name of England, convert some folks to Christianity. But really, the main purpose was as an outpost to mess with Spain as they crossed the Atlantic with all these riches. Privateering was a big deal at this point. So they need this launch position with which to attack Spanish ships so they can steal the stuff that Spain already stole from someone else. So in 1584, one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite courtiers, a man by the name of Sir Walter Raleigh, arranges a scouting expedition to North America. He sends a couple guys, Philip Amatus and Arthur Barlow, and they go to scout out a location for an eventual permanent English colony. They hop around a little bit, and then they eventually end up on Roanoke Island, which is honestly surprising because it's tiny, just 12 miles long and around 3 miles wide, and it's in the middle of a shallow sound behind a barrier island. It isn't exactly easy to get to. But they get there, and they're like, this is great. This is perfect. And they report being essentially wined and dined by the native people of the area, various groups of Carolina Algonquin that are sort of organized into these villages. So we have Croatoan to the south, Roanoke to the west along the Chowan River, and then a group of villages sort of collectively referred to as Sikatan, which is made up of Dasamunkapiak across the sound on the mainland. Modern day, it's called Man's Harbor. We have Roanoke on Roanoke Island. It's kind of like this smaller village, almost seems to be more of like an outpost of Dasamunkapiak. Pomiak, there's some others as well. Amatus and Barlow are well received, and they head back to England with rave reviews of Roanoke Island, and they also take 2 indigenous men with them. Manteo, who was from Croatoan, farther south, and Wanchese. So they take them to England, they go to the Queen, and they're like, Roanoke is great. You have to go to Roanoke. Like they're talking about a stop on a Disney cruise or something. And then they're like, look at these guys we brought back with us. Aren't they awesome? So Manteo and Wanchese have very differing opinions of their time spent in England. And this is significant, I promise. Manteo's loving it. He's like, oh, wow, look at this big city. Look at all these buildings and people. Look at all this cool stuff. They have glass and metal and guns. This is all so impressive. The English would make such powerful allies. They would really help us out against our own enemies back home. Now, Wanchese is looking at it, looking at the same stuff that Manteo's looking at, but he is like, oh no, this is bad. These people are going to completely destroy us. So in 1585, the next year, they send a second expedition. And this one is a military expedition made up of around 108 men, mostly soldiers, and they're tasked with the job of actually setting up a settlement. So they're going to lay the groundwork, put the infrastructure in place, build the houses, that sort of thing, so that later they can send women and children for this permanent colony. Now, this group is led by a man named Ralph Lane. And Lane turns out to be a terrible, terrible man for this job, just a terrible man in general, honestly. So they return across the ocean with Manteo and Wanchese in tow, and as soon as they hit land, Wanchese takes off. He's like, peace out. I don't want anything to do with this. They start setting up shop on Roanoke Island, which was heavily vouched for by Amatus and Barlow. And fairly quickly, relations with the indigenous people, which, had been great, according to Amatus and Barlow, they start to sour. And this is partly because Ralph Lane is just a terrible diplomat. Amatus and Barlow were like, more wine, please. And Lane is like, you steal that silver cup, I will kill you all. Literally. That literally happened. So Lane's blowing it. Also, disease is blowing it. Indigenous people are getting sick with these mysterious diseases from England that they have no immunity to, and they start to view it as like an intentional attack by the English. So relations start to sour. And Lane starts getting all conspiratorial. He starts to concoct this conspiracy. that the leader, the werewance of Dasamunkapiak, who was named Wingina, he later changed his name to Pamisipan, Lane starts to concoct this conspiracy theory that Wingina is trying to get them killed. And this goes so far in his mind. Juan Cheese is whispering in Wingina's ear, and he's telling him these terrible things about us, and he's sending us here, and he's sending us there, and he's trying to get us killed, and he's not providing us with food anymore. He's trying to starve us out. All of this is going on, and he's recording all of this, although there's really no evidence of any actual truth behind it. But he takes this so far that he actually ends up killing Wingina. They cut off his head. And then, after you cut off the head of the leader of the people who are feeding you, that's a problem. And so they hole up in their fort, and they're starving. They're seemingly screwed. But then, luckily, very luckily for the English, they are rescued by fellow English explorer Sir Francis Drake, who is sailing by on his way home from St. Augustine. And he stops to sort of check on the colony that his country is trying to establish, and he finds them in really, really bad shape. And so they hop on Sir Francis Drake's ships, and they sail back to England, and that expedition truly ended in disaster. Now, surprisingly, very surprisingly, considering how poorly the last expedition ended, the Queen agrees to send another group. This time, men, women, and children to establish that permanent colony. Why not? Now, don't worry, they're not going to go to Roanoke Island. Well, they are going to go to Roanoke Island for a minute, but then they're going to go farther north to the Chesapeake Bay to establish the colony. This group is led by a man named John White, who actually accompanied the 1585 expedition under Ralph Lane. He went on that expedition too as an artist. He painted pictures and maps of the area and stuff. So, I guess they're like, hey, you're a great artist. You want to be a governor? And they send John White as governor this time. So they set sail back to Roanoke first because they needed to check on 15 men who had been left behind last time to hold the fort. They're not just going to maroon them there. They're going to go get these guys or whatever, and then they're going to go on up to the Chesapeake Bay to set up their colony in a place where they haven't already burned every single bridge. But when they get there to Roanoke Island, John White goes with some other men or whatever to the site of the old fort, Fort Raleigh, and they find skeletons. The men have not survived. And they're like, okay, let's get the heck out of here. And they head back to the ship. Now, the captain of the ship, who was a Portuguese guy named Simon Fernando, he is like, nope, this is it. This is the last stop. We're not going farther north. We're not going to the Chesapeake Bay. You're going to have to make this work here. For whatever reason. None of the explanations for that really make a whole lot of sense, but for whatever reason, he refuses to take them to their intended destination, and so they're forced to set up shop on Roanoke Island, where everyone hates them. As expected, it doesn't go well. One of the colonists is shot with arrows and killed while fishing, and they don't have enough supplies. They're not self-sufficient. The 1585 group under Ralph Lane relied heavily on the native people for food. And then they burnt that bridge when they beheaded Wingina. So this group, coming after them, they don't know how to grow crops. Even if they did know how to grow crops here, this area was experiencing the worst drought in 800 years. It would have been very difficult. So John White is pretty much forced to return to England for more supplies, just after the birth of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. And so he's forced to leave his daughter and his newborn granddaughter behind and return to England. But it's okay, because he's coming back, right? He's just getting supplies. He's coming right back. The problem is, when he gets to England, they are at war with Spain. Remember their old rival Spain? And the Queen needs, apparently, every single ship to defend against the Spanish Armada. And so John White is unable to get a ship to return to Roanoke Island for 3 years. In 1590, he finally manages to catch a ride on a privateering ship, which takes him to Roanoke Island. He actually arrives on the island, chillingly, on his granddaughter's 3rd birthday. But when he gets there, he gets to the settlement site, no one's there. But there are some clues left behind. Carved into one of the palisade posts is the word Croatoan. in all capital letters. A nearby tree also has the letters CRO carved into it. Also, there's no cross. If they were in danger, they agreed on this ahead of time. If they were in danger, they were supposed to carve this particular type of cross, but there was no cross. And the houses have been carefully disassembled and taken with them. Now, Croatoan, if you remember, was the name of the village where Manteo was from on the present-day Hatteras Island. And John White knew this. Well, he even wrote it in his journal. This is my friend Bill Ray voice acting for me. I'm stealing this from episode 28.
But we found the houses taken down, and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees, with courtnays and flankers very fort-like, and one of the chief trees or posts at the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off. And 5 feet from the ground, in fair capital letters, was graven Croatoan, without any cross or sign of distress. I greatly joyed that I had safely found a certain token of their safe being at Croatoan, which is the place where Manteo was born, and the savages of the island, our friends.
Bill Ray is a legend, y'all. That was a treat. So White goes, basically, great. They're safe. They're with Manteo in Croatoan. We'll just go find them there. And he hops back in the ship, and they try to sail down to Croatoan, but they're met with terrible storms that batter the ship and blow them back and back and back until they're forced to just turn around and return to England without ever verifying that the colony had in fact moved to Croatoan. And so after that, instead of just being like, oh, they moved to Croatoan to live with Manteo's people, everybody was like, oh, they disappeared. What happened to them? It's such a mystery. A lot of theories have been proposed that the colonists did not survive. And these theories rest on them being killed either by the Spanish, who were zipping around that area in their ships and actively at war with England, or by neighboring groups of indigenous people. And then there's another survival theory that despite carving Croatoan into the post, they actually went west towards the Chowan River. That had apparently been a plan they discussed with John White before he left, to go, quote, 50 miles into the main. And artifacts have been found at a site called Site X at the mouth of the Chowan River that suggest an English presence. A metal aglet, which is part of an old shoelace, some pieces of old jars, which were used for canning, and a shard of English pottery, Surrey, Hampshire English borderware. But the thing is, none of this proves that English people actually lived at Site X. All of those things could have arrived there through trade with Native Americans, actually most likely much later than the 1580s. And same with the sites of old Croatoan villages on Hatteras Island at first, near the present-day town of Buxton. Until recently, these prior finds there, they really only proved trade with the English. There was nothing to suggest definitively that they lived there for any length of time. Until now. That's where Scott comes in. Whereabouts is this site that you've been working on excavating, and what about it, drew you to it? Why did it seem like a promising location to search?
A lot of people kind of in their mind think of some circle of huts or something, and these locations are huge. When I say the Indian village, it's 1.5 miles long, and there's 3 of them. So there, you can't miss, really. You're just trying to find a place that hasn't been destroyed by development. If you can find a slice of woods that doesn't have houses and, more importantly, never has, then you can have that undisturbed earth to go do some proper science in. And so that's what we're doing. And it's basically in the woods, about 20 feet above sea level, the entire sound side of the island. Any creek that goes to the, so much of the life is getting in a canoe and going out and fishing and coming back in. And you could carry a canoe full of fish through the woods over your head and over the hills, but why when you could just row straight up the creek? And so they live kind of near the creeks mainly. And but those creeks run for miles as well. So you really can't miss. You just have to find somewhere that hasn't been destroyed yet.
The shoreline has probably changed a lot. That's a long time ago. But I guess when you're talking about creeks coming cutting into the land, that's probably hasn't changed as much as like the actual shoreline of the sound. So that's interesting strategy there. I like that. So let's talk about what you've actually found.
Well, we go straight down to the foundation level of the longhouses, so you can see the post holes and the fire pits, and you can reconstruct exactly where the Croatoan houses were. And they seem to be in little clusters, like 4 or 5 on this ridge, and then there's 4 or 5 more over here. It's like pepperonis on a pizza almost, but it's one continuous village. And downhill from where they're living are these massive shell middens that are full of just thousands of fish vertebrae and deer and birds and turtle. And it's just everything they're eating. But mixed in with that is also thousands of pieces of broken pottery. And sometimes it fits together and we try to put it back together. And their tobacco pipes and copper earrings and all of their tools and basically everything that they had that would last to now, we have found.
Scott is describing a Croatoan village here. But they've also found some things that you wouldn't expect to find among the shells and pottery and the post holes from their longhouses.
We've been finding Elizabethan English artifacts for years, but the English lived on that island before the lost colony even got here. The Navy had been out there a little bit. So you could always argue, well, this gun got here from trade. Maybe one of those voyages, or maybe it is from colony, but they just traded it down. But finding the daub from their houses and the window glass and most recently the hammer scale from their blacksmith shop, as well as the evidence of repurposing their tools. I don't think anybody ripped the iron ring off a barrel and repurposed it into a drill on the ship on the way here. That's more of an act of desperation. And it's painfully obvious what happened anyway, just from the history, but no one knows that history. It's under a mountain of misinformation, and it's hard to kill a myth, man. People really dig their heels in, and that's the greatest thing about science, that it doesn't care how you feel. This is what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why history is so interesting, because it's kind of this mix of like science and storytelling. But I whenever you can find like a scientific proof of something that happened in the past, like forensic evidence, I feel like that's so powerful, because otherwise it's just all word of mouth, and it's like a game of telephone. It just gets like misconstrued every single time the story gets told. So I love that. I meant to ask, how long have excavations been going on at this site?
There were some people that dug on this site before us way back in the 90s. They found a snap haunch was in a layer from around 1640, even though it's to the 1580s, and it was kind of a good find. Like, hey, did they just hang on to this? But what we found is a pure 1500s layer, meaning there's nothing in there from the 1600s at all, and there's all this Elizabethan stuff there, which means the stuff that they got probably was just hung on to because it's valuable. So there's like a big gap between when they were there in the 90s and then when we came in. And of course, we're not digging exactly the same spot either, but what we've got 15 years now from 2009. And you try to prove yourself wrong the whole time. It's like the opposite of politics, right? So this hammer scale, for example, that's in the news, we found that back in June. But we were waiting on radiocarbon dates, and we're doing like all this analysis and trying to, before you run to the press like some charlatan, you have to know what you're doing. These guys that are over here, it's not just Mark Horton, but all of his colleagues, they are professionals of the highest degree. They're off digging in Africa right now. I mean, Mark has been doing archaeology since before either one of us was born. And he's not going to tell the Daily Mail, the biggest paper in England, that we have the smoking gun, rock solid evidence of the colony living there unless we do.
Yeah, you've been sitting on quite a little gem there. So how did you said you kind of found like a layer from the 1500s? How were you able to date that layer? to that time period?
Couple of ways. The first way is what's called stratigraphically, which is just a fancy word for by one layer at a time. And so, like, the very first layer is what we call the Sony Walkman layer, because that's the first technically the artifact we found from, us. And it's pretty boring in the beginning. You're getting, like kind of old Pepsi bottles or whatever. But once the further down you go, each layer is different. And you go through the Civil War and you go through the 1700s. And there's things like creamware and stuff that's just everywhere in the 1700s. And then you get to where you're not finding any of that. And you're in the 1600s and you've got these brandy bottles and these little Venetian beads and Tidewater pipes. And you're getting thousands of them. And then all of a sudden you go a little deeper and you're getting none of them. And that's an indication that you're getting into a new level. And you date the levels by the most recent thing in it. So if anything from 1600 and up had been found at this level we're talking about, then it would ruin the whole thing. Because you can't have future stuff. That rapier from the Maker's Mark looks like it's from the 1570s, which is fine. It can be older. It just can't be, from, like, no one's going to find an iPhone 28 and that wouldn't make any sense. But so you're dating by the most recent thing that is in the layer, but you're also dating by the typology of the known things, such as a coin or a coin weight or whatever. They have dates on them. And so that gives you kind of a ballpark idea. And then there's the radiocarbon dating of the teeth that we did. Ironically, one of them was on a raccoon, which the Park Service denies is indigenous to the island, and it clearly is because we've gone all the way back to BC times, and there's still raccoons. So
stay tuned. I'll be right back after a quick break.
Did you know that El Dorado was a person, not a place? Or that a disastrous and expensive attempt to colonise Panama was one of the major reasons for Scotland joining the UK? And did you know that the founders of Venezuela were a family of German bankers turned slave traders? Or that there is growing evidence that the Amazon was once home to grand cities and complex civilizations? These are just some of the surprising facts which make up the underappreciated history of Latin America, and which I have looked at on my show. So if you want to know more about the region and the unexpected impacts its history has had on the world, check out the Latin American History Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts from.
Now back to the show. I know the really significant find, like the smoking gun you mentioned, is this hammer scale.
Right.
Will you kind of tell me a little bit more about what that is and why it's so significant to find it in this place?
Well, it kind of takes me back because I used to actually blacksmith over at Festival Park. I was one of those guys making nails. And so I really understand what it is because I've been hit with it before. When you're making anything on an anvil and you put, let's say, an iron rod into the coal and you pump the bellows and get it heated up to a nice red glow and you put it on the anvil and you smack it with a hammer, the first couple of hits, these little pieces fly off and they hit you and it burns. That's why you have to wear an apron, like a leather apron. And they fall to the ground and nobody pays them any mind. But over time, you get loads of it. And this is true for every single forge found through archaeology ever anywhere. I mean, hammer scale is a well-known thing. This isn't new. Mark sees it all the time. That, though, shows that they're living and working right there. And we even found the daub, which is the leftover plaster that they use to make the walls of the houses and everything, is there. We found a window glass. And if you have window glass, you have a window. If you have a window, you have a house. And this is all coming out of a pure 16th century layer. And they're working there. And then we're finding the modified iron that they, the gun barrel that's been in however many TV shows now, that's now a chisel for maybe building canoes. And the famous arrowhead made out of a wine glass that National Geographic took a picture out of. I mean, this is major stuff. We've been on, there's a 2-hour special on Max where they filmed us find a Tudor rose live right there. We couldn't be luckier and we couldn't have better evidence than we have. But it's almost impossible to get the information out because just not even a month ago, somebody used AI to take a bunch of news clips that Mark and myself have been in from whatever show and make this video, and none of it's real, and it's got 2.7 million views, right? Then we release actually finding them in the Daily Mail, and it gets less hits than that, right? So you're battling like the colonies found every other month, but they're not really. It's just people trying to get clickbait, and so they make up whatever. And I've never talked to any of them, right? But
Right.
it's frustrating that there's no legislation about it. People can use your image, likeness, your own voice. You've got celebrities pushing products, and it's pure AI, and they didn't even know that they're doing it. And Mark laughed and said, "You're famous enough now that you've been a victim of fake news." Well, I guess. But this is real news, and I don't know. I mean, it's frustrating. People are like, didn't they find him last month? No, that wasn't real. I saw you in it though. Well, I can't help that. They stole that from whatever show, and that's just the world we're in now, I guess.
Yeah, the AI, that's really a scary thing because like I talked about earlier, this our history becomes this kind of game of telephone that is like so brought to the next level by AI because now we have like images and what seems like actual documentation and proof that isn't real. So it's kind of scary to think about how that's going to mess up history going forward, like even more. That's pretty terrifying.
Well, it's like look at how they made Bloody Mary a villain, right? She's not perfect, but they made her way worse than she actually is, for example.
Goodness, it's like Scott listened to episode 107 or something. No, I don't think he actually knew that I recently made an episode about Bloody Mary at all. We are just that much on the same page.
Winners write the history. So you've got to go back in and read the primary sources, and just no one does. Nobody does it. If they did, we wouldn't be debating this at all. Our real goal has never been to find the colony. Our real goal has been to reinstate the Croatoan into the story. Because of a marketing campaign, they got completely removed. I don't know if I should say they or we, because I am Croatoan, I guess, but the word Croatoan is left on a tree, and they teach in school that that's some cryptic message left by the colony and no one knows what it means. And I don't know how we ever got that far off from the truth, because they had Croatoan men on the ship with them coming from England that spoke English. They had been in constant contact with his tribe since the very first voyage in 1584, throughout 85. Even in 87, they turned to the Croatoan for help when one of the colonists gets murdered. And no one knows that story. All they know is Virginia Dare, right? And the county's named Dare, and she has a statue, and they celebrate her birth on a sign, home of the first white child born in this savage land, or whatever it says. And in the Croatoan, who are mentioned on every single page, and the island is labeled on the maps. They even give the latitude of the inlet, completely removed and taught in school as no one knows what this means. And that has given a free license to American Horror Story and Stephen King and all these other people to use Croatoan as some cryptic, spooky thing, which it never had. This is no different than if they wrote Ireland on a tree, and then we taught white kids we've never heard of that before. But we have, right? And so that's what we're trying to correct. This is some really low hanging fruit. Like, guys, you can't say this. That's just totally disingenuous. But as soon as you talk about who the Croatoan were, the lost colony myth dies on its own, because you don't write down where you're going and go somewhere else, right? So there's all this misinformation about, well, nothing grows on Hatteras and they couldn't live there, so they must have split up. None of that is true. And the science that we're doing shows how fat and happy these guys were. I mean, it's just full of food, and they are growing. The English even said that they got 3 harvests of corn a year on the island. My dad grew corn in our backyard. This idea that nothing grows there, that's complete horseshit. They don't like to let go of something they're emotionally invested in. And if they already had a theory in their mind, they're not going to let go of it. But that theory is based on a false premise because they were never lost in the first place.
Yeah. There's sort of this other theory, and I think this is based on a plan that they may have actually made at one point before John White went back to England, where they said, if you can't stay here, we're going to go 50 miles into the Main. And so there's this other theory that they may have gone west, kind of towards the Chowan River. And I know they even have a site that they call Site X there, where they found some things. Is there a chance, in your opinion at least, that they may have split into two groups and some went west and some went south? Or I know the nature of what they found there. Does it prove habitation, or does it just kind of prove trade? Where are you on that theory?
Well, I don't think there's a fart chance in a windstorm that they went west. I'm going to explain this whole thing. All right. They make a very big deal out of this map. There's a patch on the map. There's actually two patches on the map because the map ripped and they had to patch it up. The map, this is really important, was created in 1585, not 87. The colonies in 87. And here's the real kicker. The guy that made the map is John White. And he says in no ambiguous terms at all, I was greatly joyed to find a certain token of their safe arrival at Croatoan, the place where Mantia was born. The people of that island are friends. It was agreed by the master to captain myself and others to weigh anchor and go to Croatoan where our planters were. This whole thing about 50 miles into the Main is a sentence fragment from 900 pages of documents. It's one sentence fragment. And John White says, I told them to write down the name of where they relocated to because at my leaving, there was some discussion about going 50 miles into the Main. Now, that doesn't mean mainland. Throughout the sources, they talk about sailing along the Spanish Main and taking prizes. Well, that's the coastline. Then they talk about coming up and looking for a breach or inlet along the Main where they could enter the Sound. So the Main actually meant the coast, not mainland. They just talk different in the 16th century. And there's several examples I can point to putting that out there. Well, guess what's 50 miles down the Main from Roanoke? Hatteras, right? And none of that matters anyway, because ultimately what he said is write it down. If you had to go to the post office and mail a bill or your lights are getting shut off and you got a husband and kids and they're hungry and they want to go eat, and they're like, it's 1980. There's no cell phone. And you said, look, I have to go mail this bill. I'll be right back. And they're like, well, we're going to go to the restaurant. We're hungry. Cool. Where are you going? We hadn't decided. Well, all right, we'll just leave a note on the door. And then you get to the door and it says that you went to Sam and Omi's. You're not going to look for them at Burger King. And as far as what they found over there, they haven't found anything from the 16th century at all. They found some borderware from like 1680. And remember I said you date a layer by what's in it? Everything in that layer was from 16 something up. And they made a mountain out of an anthill and said, well, this could have been hung on to for 100 years, this particular type of pottery and nothing else, right? And it's just in this upper layer. Well, if you never find the older layer, then you really can't say that. And they never did. And that Chowan River is where the English got showered with arrows by the Mandawag after they opened up on a village of grape shot and kidnapped a child.
Here Scott is referring to when Ralph Lane kidnapped Skyko, the son of the Roanoke leader, near Site X.
So, ignoring that historical context, if you didn't know anything, in other words, if you hadn't read anything at all, and you were just trying to solve this problem and rolled out a map of North Carolina, it would make sense to go inland. There's more farmland or whatever. But if you read the actual sources, which is something that has to be done, and you understand, well, that's suicide, these guys hate the English, and not because they're savage. It's because the English murdered their chief under a flag of truce and shot him in the back and cut his head off. And as I said, they kidnapped people. They burned down a village over a cup being stolen. And their disease, the chief's brother, Grangana Mayo, and his father, Ensenor, were both killed by English disease. They attacked the English in 1586 and slaughtered soldiers that were left on Roanoke. And then they attacked the colony and killed one of them. Now you imagine that conversation. I'm going to go with Manteo to Croatoan and hopefully get rescued, which they had done just the year before. A different English group got rescued from Hatteras by Francis Drake because you can actually see ships from there and flag them down with smoke. So I'm going to go down there where they love us, and you go live with the people that just shot George Howe 16 times with arrows and beat his brains out. So, yeah, go live with them. Come on. That's just dumb. It's frustrating because I've worked my ass off on this for 20 years. And then you get these people that come in and just have no integrity at all. And they'll just say whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me, they wrote Croatoan, they carved Croatoan, they left a note basically telling us exactly where they went. Why do you think it became a mystery even to begin with? It seems like John White understood exactly what that message meant, based on his recordings in his journal. He's like, oh, they went to Croatoan, great. Why did it ever become a mystery?
It became a mystery because of a marketing campaign that made it one. Nobody ever said they were lost until the 20th century. Some of it's greed, some of it's racism. I will back off Paul Green a little bit, the guy that wrote the play.
Here, Scott is talking about the Lost Colony outdoor drama, which began in Manio in 1937 and has continued ever since. It's kind of a big deal around here.
The original play wasn't that bad. They had them just go into Croatoan, and they kind of were included, not as much as they should be, but way more than what became later. The play became less and less accurate. And then the politicians in Roanoke Island are the ones that push this narrative of no one knows what this word means and all these other lies. That voyage in 1584, only 7 people went to Roanoke for one day. The entire voyage was spent on Hatteras. And there's also the blue-eyed Indians wearing English clothes who told them their ancestors were white people who could speak out of a book and mention Raleigh by name.
Here, Scott is referring to an account recorded by an English explorer named John Lawson when he visited Hatteras Island in 1701. I talk more about this in episode 28 as well.
If this was anywhere else, if they had written Chesapeake on a tree and there were blue-eyed Indians up there and Manio had been from up there and they'd lived, if you just took anywhere else and put it in place of Croatoan, it would be accepted. But because we are in the same county as Roanoke Island, we can't win with the politics. If we were in a neighboring county, then we could just champion our own story. But we can't because, it got hijacked by Roanoke Island and they have all the power. I mean, there's a state park there, Festival Park, with a replica ship that never went there. I used to work there. So I'm telling you firsthand, when they train you, they say, well, we don't talk about the first voyage at all because that was, in Hatteras. And we don't talk about the first couple of months of the second voyage because that was in Hatteras. And we don't mention anything that happened anywhere but here, to be that greedy and that egotistical that you're going to cut everyone out of the story except for your little piece and then act like that's all that happened. But that's what they do. And it's because the entire economy of that island is based on this lie. Every single street downtown is named after a character from the play. They have, the whole Virginia Dare statue they named the county after her. And it's because the only thing that happened of any significance on Roanoke was her birth. So that's what they champion to the high hills.
Yeah. I've never thought about, I've lived in Dare County my whole life. I've never thought about it like that. I mean, Manio, Roanoke Island is like the seat of our county government. And it is where all of the politicians are kind of based out of. I've never thought about the bias there and why they would want to center the story on Roanoke Island and what they're getting out of that, because it really is like their claim to fame. And it's the reason people go and visit and spend money on Roanoke Island. And I've honestly never thought about it like that. That's interesting.
That's the only reason there's a lost colony at all. Because if you sit down and read the primary sources, which I get it, who's going to read 16th century documents on their day off, right? No one. But if you did, it's painfully obvious. This is like somebody talking to me and saying, so it's your theory that the North won the Battle of Gettysburg? Yes. Because if you read it, it's really obvious. This is as obvious as that. Finding the colony in Croatoan is like finding a cannonball at Gettysburg. It's not surprising. It makes sense.
I was truly intrigued by Scott's theory as to why the story of the Roanoke colony became so misguided. I hadn't really considered the politics behind it, but it makes a whole lot of sense, especially if you're familiar with Dare County politics and how everything tends to play out here. I attended a severely overcrowded high school on Roanoke Island, where even the hastily erected village of trailers behind the gym were bursting at the seams, all because, according to word on the street, they didn't want to break up their football team by moving over half the student body to a new school. All I'm saying is the good old boys over there have been known to pull a string or two to twist things in their own favor. I do think there were racial biases at play too, though. I think centuries-old racist views of Indigenous Americans also played a role here. The white people who wrote history did not want to believe, they did not want to even consider the option that the English, these civilized Christian people, would intentionally go to live with people they viewed as godless savages. That was never the plan. The plan was for the indigenous people to assimilate with the English, to convert to Christianity, to give up their own culture and customs, to become English. Not the other way around. Not at all. And so to accept the possibility that the English assimilated with the Croatoan, gave up their English customs, interbred, had biracial babies, God forbid, that was not something they were willing to accept. In fact, they would rather believe that the English, these men, women, and children, were massacred, brutally murdered by these people whom they viewed as savages. Which option supports their deeply ingrained racist views? Assimilation or massacre? Our minds are deeply complicated beasts. We do not like to have our beliefs challenged. It goes against everything our brains are trying to do biologically, which is to make sense of things, to understand, to be in control of situations and of knowledge. And when you think you know and understand something so deeply and so fully, in this case, these natives are godless savages, and the English would never, under any circumstances, forsake their Englishness, their Christianity, their civility to go live with them. That is your deeply rooted perception, your context for understanding the world. And then you see that word, Croatoan, carved in the post. And underneath it all, you know exactly what that word means. But challenging deeply rooted beliefs is painfully difficult. Your brain rejects it. Croatoan? They're not there. I don't know where they went. They must have disappeared. I bet the savages killed them. That's what savages do, after all. And this misguided thought, sparked out of a need to defend long-held beliefs, grows and grows as the story is retold over and over again, and it's transformed into a myth of epic proportions. And whether it's based in racism or greed, politics, tourism dollars, there is motive there to try to manipulate this story. But now it seems we can put that myth to bed. The evidence found on Hatteras Island, evidence of a blacksmith, hammer scale, which seems to prove an English presence over a long period of time, may finally force us to face the obvious answer we tried to bury for so long. You have this scientific evidence now. Do you think it's going to change people's minds? Or do you think they're going to cling to the mystery and cling to some of these other theories that, they were massacred by the Spanish or by the indigenous people? Where do you see us going from here?
I don't know what it's going to do. I think some people are just going to dig their heels in because, you got people that think the earth is flat, for God's sakes. And so that right there shows that logic doesn't matter. But I think a lot of people are thrilled. There's a lot more positive comments than negatives. And a lot of people are like, we've always known that, but thank you for, proving it. And they're totally support. Pretty much the more educated somebody is on the subject, the more they lean toward what we're doing. And it's always the people that know absolutely nothing that want to run their mouth. And there'll probably still be some of those, and I don't care. I mean, you can't let that stop you from doing something because you'll never accomplish anything. There's always going to be somebody chirping. And the easiest thing to do, if somebody else has done a ton of work, to put yourself on the same platform, is you just disagree. Right. And so you're always going to have people do that. But this is science, and it's not an opinion. Like, this is what was there. This is how we know. Deal with it. Our educational system is a joke when it comes to history. It's not just this story. I mean, look at what they did to Pocahontas.
Episode 24, once again, same page.
So I just feel like as a nation, we've got to do a better job, especially when it comes to minorities, because winners write the history. And natives come in the museum all the time, Apache, Lakota, whatever. And they say, I'm from whatever state, whatever tribe, and over there, ABC happened, but they teach XYZ. And it seems to be a universal problem that we really should, as a nation, go in, all the historians and educators, and try again. You know, each state do their own, and go back in and look at these stories and look at the primary sources, go back to the source material and see if what's been being repeated since the 30s or 40s might have a touch of racism in it, because it does.
I'm so jealous, Scott. It's like my lifelong dream to be part of like an archaeological dig. So I think it's so cool that you've been able to be part of this, and that like you've managed to find such significant evidence that has to be like so fulfilling to be part of something. You know, you're like setting the record straight. You're setting the story straight, and that's so powerful. So
yeah, you can come dig with us.
I know I'm gonna for real. Like, can I?
Yeah. So we're not digging right now, but I have, like, I'm still getting hammer scale out of the residue. You can come do that with me. I'll tell you, it's fun for about 20 minutes, then it turns into work, because most of it is separating deer vertebrae from turtle bone, and there's a lot of tedious stuff. But then the third grade was in there a couple years ago, and we sifted a little piece of a bucket, and they found a silver ring, and we didn't know it at the time, but that's from that hammer scale level. That's from the colony, and it even has the little piece where the jewel was set. So the third grade of Hatteras, 18 kids, has found more than the Park Service.
That's amazing. That's really incredible.
It's like time travel doing this stuff. You sit back and take stock of it. It's like, wow, you know, this their house was right here. They had a fire right there. You can see the pit, and somebody ate a deer right where we're sitting and then threw it over here. And there's a musket ball that they probably shot it with. And somebody's going to dig us up one day, you know? It probably will be the plastic aid or something.
Yeah, a lot of plastic. Yeah. It really is important work that they're doing. But you guys, they need some help.
www.cashatteras.com, cashatteras.com. That's where you can donate and help us out, because we're not sponsored by anyone. And, you know, we pay for all these things with t-shirts and books, and it's a tax write-off. It's a fully 501c3 nonprofit, the Croatoan Archaeological Society, and they're supposed to put that link in the Daily Mail, and they didn't, of course. But we really need some glass cases, and we want to try to get some touch screens up that just explain everything, and got a real team here, XRF machine, and got the radiocarbon dating, and it's like we have everything except money. And it sucks to ask for it, but I kind of have to.
It's important work, setting the record straight. It's the whole mission of History Fix, the whole reason I pop into your airwaves each week. And you know, I think Scott's right. I think the mystery of the lost colony will endure for a lot of people for the simple reason that they want it to. But I'm personally ecstatic over these new findings. The thought of the colonists making it to Croatoan and being accepted amongst the people there, and really just not trying to conquer them, right? Just joining them and living with them willingly in this beautiful blend of cultures where you have Algonquin-style longhouses interspersed with an English-style blacksmith fort. age, where you have relationships between two groups of people who were so incredibly different in almost every way. It's a testament to our ability, our potential to accept and love one another no matter what. And I think it's such beautiful closure to what has always been a very tragic story. The story of the lost colony is a tragedy. The murder of Wingina, the deaths of so many Indigenous Americans by disease, misunderstandings, outright aggression, an inability to work together to see past differences. I mean, we have women and children, babies lost, presumed dead, murdered. That's not a fun story. That's a gut-wrenching tragedy. Why are we so determined to hold on to it when in reality, if the new evidence found on Hatteras means what it appears to mean, the real story had a happy ending? We set aside our differences, we overcame our differences, and we got along. And that is not an ending you see repeated often throughout history. Let's teach that to our children, that we are capable of happy endings, that the lost colony of Roanoke may just be the found colony of Croatoan. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting, and maybe you even learned something new. And a huge thank you to Scott Dawson. I have linked the website that he mentioned in the description in case you want to support the work that they're doing. Be sure to follow my Instagram at HistoryFixPodcast to see some images that go along with this episode and to stay on top of new episodes as they drop. And I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen, and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix. Information used in this episode was sourced from The Head in Edward Nugent's Hand by Michael Oberg and Island Free Press. As always, links to these sources can be found in the show notes.